Again, I want to thank everybody for coming and thank you for your patience. We're going to wait just another minute and then we'll get started. So I'd like to welcome everybody again to tonight's webinar. Before we get started, I'd like to allow our interpreters, Leticia, Ernesto, and Willis, to make an important announcement about tonight.
Good afternoon. Hi, my name is Ernesto Jimenez. I'll be one of your interpreters today for Spanish, along with my colleague Leticia. And I just wanted to point out that if you're on a computer, you're likely seeing a little globe icon at the bottom of your screen. The little globe is the interpretation button. If you click on it, please select your desired language, English, Spanish, or any other language available there. And once you select that language, you're all set. If you're on a mobile device, what you're going to see likely is 3 little dots on the bottom right corner. Those 3 little dots, once you click on that, then you'll be able to see the option to select the language. But there's a third step, which is to confirm. Once you've selected the language, you need to confirm. So just to reiterate, it's 3 dots, select the language, and then hit the confirmation button. If you have any questions, there is a Q&A button. And if you have any problems, any difficulties with the tech, feel free to reach out in the chat. Thank you.
Buenas tardes. Bienvenidos a esta sesión. Si ustedes necesitan la interpretación en el idioma en español, por favor diríjanse a la parte inferior de su pantalla, donde ustedes mirarán un mundito. Por favor, presiónenlo. Después de presionarlo, por favor, elijan el idioma que desean. Si ustedes están utilizando un teléfono celular, por favor, busquen en su pantalla, en la parte inferior, 3 puntitos. Presiónenlos, elijan el idioma que ustedes desean y confirmen después de haber elegido el idioma. Muchas gracias y que disfruten esta sesión.
Just interjecting here for tech, Willis, if you're speaking, we can't hear you. So in the case that you want to jump back into the main room, that would be great. All right, well, experiencing technical difficulties for the Cantonese channel. If you are able to, you can jump into the Cantonese channel now, and I would invite my colleagues who are Cantonese speakers that you can put that in the chat so people can jump in so that we'll move forward. Sorry about that, apologies. But again, all interpreter channels are now open. Andrew, back to you.
Thanks. So I'm just going to quickly go over the agenda for tonight before I pass it to our Rhonda, who will talk about our partnership organization, LIIF. So Rhonda is going to be going first, and then and tell us a little bit about their organization, and then I will talk a little bit about Start Small, Think Big, and how we work, and then we'll get to the substantive, workers' comp and employee classification part of the presentation. And again, so just to note, if you have any questions, put them in the Q&A box, and technical difficulties go in the chat. And one last note is that this deck and recording will be emailed out to, will be made available next week to everybody who attended. And with that, I'm going to hand it to Rhonda Wolf, our partner at LIIF, to talk more about her organization.
Thank you, Andrew. Would you mind putting up the first slide for me? Thank you. All right. Good evening, everyone. We are just so happy that you're joining us this evening. We're wrapping up our last part of our 4-part series on the employment law. And so absolutely thrilled to have you with us this evening. I am Rhonda Wolf with LIIF, and I just want to take a moment to share with you and give you an overview on LIIF. We are the Low Income Investment Fund, better known as LIIF, and we are a nonprofit 501c organization, C3 organization, and we started our program services in 1984, so it has been 37 years. We are a leading national community development financial institution, or CDFI, that invest in communities with the mission of creating pathways of opportunity for low-income people and communities. We aim to expand economic opportunity and improve the quality of life in disinvested communities by helping those who may not be able to secure capital through traditional banking. Next slide, please. LIIF believes that everyone should have a chance to succeed in life, and every community can be vibrant, healthy, and self-sufficient. We work in the areas of affordable housing, early care and education, charter school financing, healthcare centers, and transit-oriented development. We also participate in policy advocacy work with regard to these focus areas. Next slide, please. LIIF is one of the few CDFIs in the nations that focus heavily on early care and education, or ECE, programs and facilities. We provide loans, grants, technical assistance to ECE centers nationwide, with targeted programs in California, Washington, D.C., and New York. We also support systems change and advocate for policies that strengthen the ECE field. So hope that you enjoy this evening's webinar. If there's any questions in regards to the webinars, you can reach out to me directly, and I know most of you do have my contact information. If not, I will put my email and contact number in the chat box, then you can reach out to me directly. This wraps up my presentation, and back to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Rhonda. So my name is Andrew Cohen. I'm a legal fellow with Start Small, Think Big. I'm going to begin talking a little bit about Start Small and Think Big in our mission, and how we how to apply for our services and what our services cover. All right. So the premise of our organization is that small businesses are an essential part of the economy, and in a way for individuals from marginalized communities to support themselves economically, and their a very important economic opportunity for a wide range of people. Sorry. Sorry for the technical difficulties. All right. So we serve small business owners from low income and marginalized communities, and this is kind of a survey of the businesses that we work with. So the main types of services that we provide are legal services, marketing services, and financial services. And these, in terms of legal services, it's entity selection, advice, corporate governance advice, and we work with individuals and help them figure out their legal needs and then match them with volunteers and from some of the top professionals in the respective fields, and our financial and marketing programs work under a similar premise. And all of our services are free. We, as I mentioned, we serve the majority of our clients come from marginalized communities. The criteria for being a client is there has to be $500 worth of sales within the past 3 months, and there's a cap at $1 million worth of revenue, and the household income has to be less than 7.5 times the federal poverty guidelines, and households must have less than 100,000 in assets. This is an overview of the application process. These links will be made available through when we send out the slides to everyone next week. And this just talks a little bit more about how we verify people's information to ensure that they meet our eligibility criteria when they are applying. And as I mentioned, this is done through personal tax returns, bank statements, and a record of sales. Though the record of sales can come through a variety of platforms, whether you take payments on Venmo or a paper receipt or Square or PayPal, or however you sell your goods or service. And outside of direct client or creating referrals and direct client service, we also have other resources, a lot of presentations like this. Past presentations are available online at the links that you see here, and they cover a wide range of legal topics from with a focus on the parts that are relevant to small businesses. So before I get into the substance of the substantive portion of today's workshop, I have to give a disclaimer. Nothing today should be construed as legal or tax advice. These topics are very complicated, and so this presentation is not comprehensive. There are caveats and exceptions to these rules, and so it is important to consult a lawyer or an accountant to ensure that your specific situation is covered and there isn't an exception. Nothing in this presentation should be construed as creating an attorney-client relationship, and these materials are for educational purposes only. So, what is worker classification and why is it important? Worker classification refers to the set of factors that are looked at when determining whether somebody working for a company or individual is an independent contractor or an employee. This is important because whether somebody is an independent contractor or an employee can, especially when they are an employee, creates legal obligations under California labor law. Mistakes in classification would lead to, could potentially lead to not fulfilling these obligations. And a failure to do that can have criminal and civil penalties. So that is, why it's important why this topic is important and why it is important to consult a lawyer when you have questions about making these determinations. The general rule in California, the general test that is used to analyze whether a person is a independent contractor or an employee is called the ABC test. This test applies in most situations. There are some exceptions for professional services and partnerships, but outside of those, this is the most common test. And so it looks at 3 factors. In order to be classified as an independent contractor, the worker needs to meet all 3 factors. So the worker should be performing the work free from the control and direction of the hiring entity. The worker should be performing work that is outside the usual course of the hiring entity's business. And the worker is customarily engaged in an independently established trade that is the same nature of the work performed. The best example, or the example that I most commonly use to illustrate this test would be whatever your business is. If you hire a plumber to come fix the pipes or the water or a leak for your business, you're not telling them how to fix the leak. You're asking them to fix it, but you're not really controlling how they do it. You don't normally, your business, unless you're also a plumber, which I would hope you're not calling one. But that's not a service that your business, or a good that your business normally provides. So it's outside the course of your normal business. And a plumber that's a trade that they do on a regular basis for other individuals and businesses in addition to yourself. So that is a clear case of an independent contractor. And this is just to reiterate, the presumption in California is that a worker is an employee, and the employer, if it's ever like an issue in court, like if this is something that's gone to court, it's the employer's responsibility to show that the individual is an independent contractor, because the basic assumption is that they are an employee. In order to be, as I said, in order to be an independent contractor, all of those factors need to be met. And so that is why it's important to talk to an attorney if you have questions about classification. And this is the example of kind of going into a little bit more detail about how, an example of where somebody would be an independent contractor and how each of those three prongs is met. And one thing to note is, so when somebody is an employee, that carries a lot of the obligations that we're going to discuss later. And an independent contractor, state law does not place as many obligations. So it's sometimes there's a tendency to try to fit people into the independent contractor definition because of those extra obligations. And it's important to make sure that they do meet those requirements. Or so in California, and this is why it's important, willful misclassification can carry high civil penalties in the thousands of dollars. There, in addition to the penalties for misclassifying, if the misclassification results in a failure to meet other state laws that are a consequence of the classification, there can be additional civil and criminal penalties. And workers who believe they've been misclassified are allowed to file a claim for that misclassification with the state, and employers are not allowed to retaliate for that. And we're going to discuss this a little bit more later, but one of the laws is, if somebody is classified as an employee, then the employer must purchase workers' compensation insurance for them. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about some exceptions where the ABC test does not apply, just to to go into a little bit more detail. So professional careers like dentists, doctors, and lawyers, professional consulting services, musicians performing single engagement live events, photographers, videographers, and stuff like similarly related careers, and then artistic occupations. Now, this list isn't comprehensive, but it does cover a lot of the large areas, the most common areas that are exempt from the ABC test. And it's also important to note, just because somebody is in this career does not mean that they are automatically an independent contractor. It just means that a different, more complicated balancing test applies. And so it can be important to talk to a lawyer when those sorts of situations come up. If you have any questions. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about workers' compensation in California. So what is it? It's an insurance that is purchased by employers by law for employees, and it pays out to employees in situations where they're injured on the job and while they recover from that work-related injury. One of the reasons that California generally pushes much harder than other states at having a lot of people classified as employees. Some states have more relaxed tests or standards between an employee or an independent contractor. And one of the reasons behind this is because of the is California's requirement to purchase workers' compensation, is they want as many people as possible to be covered by these sorts of programs. So California requires that employers have workers' compensation for their employees. The most common exception to this is that if you are a sole proprietor, if you are the only person working for your business, you do not need to carry workers' compensation insurance for yourself. But if you are a sole proprietor who has employees, you must purchase it for those employees. So it's a very narrow exception. And it's can be narrowed further. The one written out in the law is roofers that are sole proprietors still have to carry it. I imagine that's probably because it's a fairly high risk job. The other situation, probably more relevant, is depending on the organizational structure of the entity that you have, you may be required to purchase workers' compensation insurance for yourself. For example, if you're an S corporation, because you are now, even though you're employing yourself, you're the employee of this entity, and that entity is required to have workers' compensation insurance for their employees. And then the last one is independent contractors, which is why there's that importance in, this is one of the obligations that differs between employees and independent contractors. So the cost of workers' compensation insurance has two main factors that go into determining the price of it. How much the employee is paid, because the insurance pays them a portion of their wage while they're injured. So the more they make, the more the insurance is. The other part that is relevant is how dangerous is the job. And this is, I think intuitive, because if you're more likely to be injured, the insurance is more likely to have to pay you, and so it's at a higher rate. So office workers tend to have lower premiums. Roofers tend to have very high premiums. But the average rate in California was $1.56 per $100 in payroll. But again, this can, there can be a pretty wide range in rates depending on your business and the wage that you pay your employee. So in California, it's a criminal offense to fail to carry workers' compensation insurance. So if you have an employee and you fail to purchase it, you can be prosecuted for that. The first offense is punishable by up to a year and twice the cost of the premium or $10,000, whichever is more. And the second offense raises the minimum fine to $50,000. One other thing to note is that when you fail to carry the insurance, you become responsible for the cost that the insurance would have had to pay if somebody's injured. So that's just something to keep in mind, that it can be very expensive to fail to have the insurance when you're required to. So the next section deals with payroll taxes. And so again, these are relevant when somebody is classified as an employee. And I'm not going to go into too much detail with all the percentages as I broke them down here, but I'm going to give a broad overview of each of them. And so you have your federal and state income tax and Social Security and Medicare, also called the self-employment tax, that is shared between the employer and the employee. You have the state unemployment tax, which is paid by the employer. You have the federal unemployment tax, which is also paid by the employer. You have state disability insurance, which is paid by the employee. And in California, there's something called the retaining tax, which is a pretty low tax on the first $7,000 of income. Now, this stuff is pretty complicated and can get pretty convoluted, which is why having a payroll software or a payroll provider can be like very, very helpful, very worth it if you have employees, because trying to navigate this and file all of these taxes on your own is an incredibly difficult task, especially if you're already running a business. And these providers can streamline that process, can automate that process. So some popular or like common providers are QuickBooks, Wave, and Gusto. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but Gusto. And so these providers don't do everything for you. You still have to do the initial setup, though. I believe most of them, or the ones that I've had experience with, walk you through the initial steps, like tell you which things you need. So you'll have to register your business with state and federal tax authorities, and put the registration numbers into the software so that they're able to pay the taxes on your behalf. After you've done this, you'll put in either the salary of employees or the hourly wage along with their hours, and your banking information, and then the payroll software will calculate based off the employee's wages how much is paid in taxes. And lastly, hiring an accountant can be, especially when you're getting to the point where you have employees, can be very helpful because they are able to ensure that you're complying with relevant taxes and filing not only taxes just as it relates to payroll, but for your business as an entity. I've provided some links to some helpful resources published by the state of California on all of these topics. As I mentioned earlier, this deck will be sent out to everybody who has attended this. So I know we finished a little bit early. So we, at this time we can answer any questions that participants have. Okay, so the first question is, should my assistant, a teacher, apply? I'm not sure what they would be applying for, because I see the timestamp of this was before I started the substantive part of the presentation. If you're asking about applying for Start Smalls services, then I mean, they're welcome to apply. We screen for eligibility, so that would probably be the best way to determine whether they are eligible. Somebody else asked if limited liability corps are the same as a sole proprietor. So those are two different entity types. If you're asking this with regard to whether a workers' compensation insurance is needed for yourself, if you are an LLC, the answer is that it depends on your specific situation. If you are an LLC, that is LLCs that take an S Corp election, generally do need to. LLCs that are not taking that election, if it's only one person working for it and some other special circumstance does not apply, they generally do not. But one thing I should have said before starting to answer questions is, I'm able to answer questions, general questions, but if questions start getting fact specific, that's kind of the line between, providing educational and, general information and providing legal advice. It's, and those types of questions I'm not able to answer. Okay. Sorry, give me 1 second. Looking at the chat box. Somebody asked to see the slide on with all the taxes. I mean, I want to make it clear that I would really not recommend trying to do payroll taxes yourself. As I actually have recently had an experience with that personally, because I was using a provider who at the last second determined that I wasn't eligible. So I had to file the first round of my business's payroll taxes myself, and I need to meet with an accountant because there's so many of them and it is so complicated that it's really difficult to do on your own. So I mean, this was kind of an illustration of that complexity rather than meant to be an illustration of that complexity rather than a guide. Does the city of San Francisco have any unique or special payroll taxes or fees? I don't know the answer to that question, unfortunately. I would imagine the best place to look for that would be the the city of San Francisco website. I can't think of an example of a city having payroll tax off the top of my head, but if anywhere did, it would probably be San Francisco. So I don't want to, I don't know the answer to that question, unfortunately.
Andrew, one of the questions listed here from a provider is trying to understand, can she claim the expenses from the employees charging for a fingerprinting? Can she expense that if it's claimed through her business? Can she actually, when she files for taxes, can she claim that?
So I just want to make sure I'm understanding the situation correctly. So if for whatever reason the business required that an employee was fingerprinted, would that count as a business expense when it came to taxes? So it could depend on the structure, but I would say under most traditional circumstances, I believe that it would. But again, the best person to ask that type of question would be an accountant. So, I mean, the things that can be written off for as a business expense are things that are necessary to your business, is the guidance that I've read. So, things that are necessary to running your business generally can be written off. If it falls outside of that, then it's not.
All right, thank you. Also from Sharon, second question is, if the employees is going to take any courses, would that be the employer's obligation to pay for those courses?
So that sort of question gets a bit more complicated than what this presentation was meant to cover. In California, employment law beyond classification and taxes and workers' compensation insurance is very protective of the employee generally. I think one of the factors at whether an employee bears the cost associated with, or whether the employee bears the cost of something that the employer bears the cost of something the employee is doing, is whether it's required by the employer. That is one of the main factors, but as I kind of mentioned earlier, I'm not able to really get into the facts of a specific situation and provide an answer. I can, provide general information like, things that are required by the, generally things that are required by the employer are more likely to be required to be reimbursed. But that's the kind of question you'd want to ask a lawyer to make sure that you had clarity, because you don't want to make the wrong decision there.
Great. One more question from the same provider, Sharon, asking the facts that if the employee is going to take any courses under the, I guess, the working hours, is the employer obligated to pay for those hours as of she is or he is at work?
I don't feel like I'm able to answer that question, unfortunately. That's starting to get into wage and hour law, which is definitely an important topic and one that I would love to cover in another presentation, but I haven't done that for today. So
all right, well, thank you.
well, if there are any other questions, I hope that this was helpful and that it was an informative session for everybody. And